Hello everyone, my name is Adriana Eufrosina Bora, and I'm the first author of the paper MSQA, a framework for scaling beyond compliance, the assessment of corporate modern slavery statements with AI-driven question and answering. This is a collaboration between researchers here at the Queensland University of Technology in Australia and Hannah from DigiNext. Before I present the paper, I would like to set the context and first to start by introducing what is modern slavery. Modern slavery, it is a situation of exploitation that a person cannot refuse or leave due to threats, coercions, or abuse of power. It can take many forms across the globe, from forced child labor or forced labor, domestic servitude, sex trafficking, the use of children as soldiers, the bondage of forced marriage, or even the trafficking of people for organ harvesting. And there are estimated to be over 50 million people living in modern slavery today, an increase by 10 million since the last estimates in 2018. But we often think that modern slavery only happens in the developing world or is something that we are not connected with. Well, in fact, most of modern slavery happens in the global supply chain of large corporations. And we can see that even in developed countries such as Canada, there are products such as the electronics, garments, even gold that are imported within the country, being at a very high risk of being produced by people in a situation of modern slavery. And those products can end up on our table or of the clothes we're wearing, on our bags, or the electronic we're using day to day. And this is how we are linked to this unfortunate crime. So, in response to this, governments across the globe, they're passing legislation such as the Modern Slavery Act in the UK in 2015, in Australia in 2018, and Canada last year, asking large corporations to look within their supply chain and to assess the risk of modern slavery, and then take actions to address this crime, and importantly, then to report on this work by publishing annual statements on their website and on government's registry. And we have similar legislation now being passed across the globe that are asking large corporations not only to look for modern slavery, but for human rights and environmental due diligence at large. And what all these laws have in common is that they have a reporting element. They're asking for the statements from companies to be made public. And while companies are doing the right thing, they are publishing these statements. Unfortunately, each year, thousands of statements remain unanalyzed. The reason for this is that academics and civic society analysts are only able to take samples of those statements and assess them manually to be able to check how well the companies are responding to this law. But unfortunately, none of them have the capacity to scale this analysis and to create transparency and accountability at scale. And when some studies, such as the work that we have been doing in the Project AIMS in previous papers, looked at the development of AI to be able to assess this statement against modern slavery, we were only able to do this by focusing purely on compliance questions that are just saying, checking if the companies are responding to the mandatory criteria of the law, but we are unable to check if the companies are actually taking the actions they're saying they're doing within their statements. So even when those other civic society or academics are having the right methodology to assess the quality of statements by going in depth manually within each statement, those methodologies are very different. So unfortunately, companies are being kept accountable against different methodologies. So we need to standardize the methodologies around checking for quality and then bringing the tools that we developed in Project AIMS to be able to scale this assessment, to be able to really assess all companies each year across the same metrics, and to be able to understand what are the companies that are leading the work against modern slavery and what are the companies that need to be guided more to improve their practices. And this is where the AIMS QA framework comes into place. We are hoping to be able to scale beyond compliance checks and assess corporate modern slavery statements with AI-driven methods. So we have contributions both for the policy side and for the data side. That's why we were really happy to be able to publish our work and present it as part of the data and policy conference and journal. So, as part of our policy contribution, we are really trying to map out all these different benchmarking methodologies that the civic society and academia have put out there, and to try to understand what are all the different metrics that they're assessing, but also what is the intersection of those metrics, and what that can generate is this prioritization framework that will help us move toward this standardization of methodology. And on the other hand, we have the AI and data contributions by bringing in some of the methods that we developed in fine-tuning AI models to assess modern slavery statements, and to be able to do it now not only at compliance level, but at quality level based on those benchmarking methodologies. So I will start now by focusing on the policy contribution of this paper and present a little bit more the methodology. We started by conducting a literature review of all the different studies that have assessed modern slavery statements either in Australia and in the UK. And I know one of the questions that we receive as part of the review of this paper is why UK and Australia? And the answer is simple. The UK and Australia have been the laws that have been implemented the longest, so they have created a lot of modern slavery statements as an output as businesses are responding to this law. So, and what is also important is that these laws have this centralized registry by the government. So we have a centralized database that we can look at, download the statements, and then assess them with either manual assessment, but also with AI components. While if we go back to that initial slide that I presented with all the other different laws, either some of them are very recent, so companies haven't yet started responding to them, or they do not have this centralized infrastructures and digitalized infrastructure of collecting these statements. So this is why we're focusing on UK, Australia, and we are bringing learnings into Canada. Because now we have companies in Canada that started reporting this year, so there is a lot of transferability there. But we believe that even beyond the modern slavery legislation, the mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislations will be also able to take recommendations and learnings from this study. So going back to the methodologies, we looked at all the different literature studies or even gray literature conducted by NGOs and civic society organizations assessing UK and Australian modern slavery statements. And we find about 23 of them, but some of them are studies that happen in multiple years. So in fact, we find 13 unique methodologies that we were able to collect. And what we've done, we went within the methodology of each of these study, and we tried to see what are the metrics that they're using when they are assessing the modern slavery statements. So we find the 13 methodology, we put together over 460 individual metrics from all these different studies. Then we map everything back to the 7 mandatory criteria of the law. But of course, some of these metrics repeat themselves. So we streamline them by the questions so that they're asking. So about 211 unique questions. We give them a topic so we can have an idea of the general topic that those questions and metrics are talking about. And then we look at what are the questions that are found in at least 3 of these methodologies, and those then become the questions of our prioritization framework. So the 7 mandatory criteria of the Australian Modern Slavery Act are asking for the statement to be signed and approved by the board, then for the statement to really well indicate what is the reporting entity of that statement, and then go and describe the structure, operation, and supply chain of the organization and the reporting entity. Then explain the risk identified through the supply chain and operations, and then describe the actions that the company took to mitigate this risk. But also, if they found the case of modern slavery, how are they remediating for those cases? And then to present how they are measuring the effectiveness of these actions throughout each year, and how are they consulting with their own and control entities in the development of this modern slavery statement. So making sure that all the other institutions or that the company's owns and controls are aware of the statement and all the other policies that the company has, and any other information that the company would like to talk about. So we were able to, as I mentioned, to go through all the different studies and then map everything back to the 7 mandatory criteria. And I will explain when I'm going to talk a bit more about the AI element, why this was such an important element from our analysis. So this mapping that we've done really enable us now not only to be able to run an assessment at compliance level for the 7 mandatory criteria, but now if we want to look more deeply within a criteria, so let's say I don't just want to know, has the company described its structure, operation, and supply chain, but I want to go deeper and find more information, something a bit more specific. And I want to learn a bit more about the supply chain of the corporation. And then I have multiple other questions that I can ask. But for instance, I'm really interested if the company describe the supply chain spend. And if it does that, is that supply chain spend by major suppliers, by country, or by the total spend? So we can observe now how we can move from compliance check with the requirements of the law, which are so vague, to more granular question, which can indicate quality of reporting. Because if a company not just only describes very vaguely its structure, operation, but supply chain, but actually moves as deeply as to say, we even know the total supply chain spend by dollars, that means that they have done a lot of work to try to really map out their supply chain. So this is why this framework is such an important policy contribution, because it really helps us to visualize that transition between compliance check to quality check. Now, once we have built this framework, we were able to come back to our data development. And now I would like to move into the second contribution of this paper, which is to AI and data. And what we were able to do was to build upon our previous work. And here it's mainly our fine-tuned modern BERT. So for that, I need to take a step back and tell you a bit more about some of our previous papers. As part of Project AIMS, which is a multi-year project on AI against modern slavery, as I mentioned, we really focus on developing AI solutions that allow us to go within each statement and assess if the mandatory criteria of the law were described or not by companies. And to do that, we built the largest annotated data set of modern slavery statements. And then we took large language models such as Llama and BERT, and then we fine-tuned them on this data set of over almost 6,000 documents. But because we do this assessment at sentence level, we had over 800,000 sentences that we used to fine-tune these large language models. And then in other papers, we try to always compare the results of these fine-tuned models with the generative models in zero shot, so only AI models that only see prompts. And we see the fine-tuned models are really good at classifying sentences relevant or not for the mandatory criteria. But these large language models are very, very big and hard to run. So what we've done in another paper, we had multiple models that we fine-tune with different methodologies, and we treat them as teacher models. And then we distill all of those models into a student model that is able to perform just as well and efficient as running all these different teacher models in parallel, but 7 to 8 times faster and 6 to 7 times energy consuming, saving energy. And that's our fine-tuned modern BERT. This is our smallest, most efficient model that we were able to build that really is really good at identifying if a sentence is relevant or not for a mandatory criteria. And that's why it was so important for us to be able to map those streamlined questions that the streamlined questions that we had in this mapping to the mandatory criteria of the law. So now let's say we go back to our question about the supply chain spend of the supplier. So I want to be able to ask that question. So now I know that that question is related to criteria 2. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this statement and I'm going to split it in sentences and so on. And then I ask Modern BERT to assess this statement in the sentences and to extract all the different sentences that are relevant to the criteria 2 of the act, and then check and extract also 100-word context around the sentences that the Modern BERT thought that they are relevant. Once I was able to do that, Modern BERT is going to give me all the sentences that are relevant to this description of supply chain operation and structure, plus the context. And then that becomes the evidence that I'm going to give to another LLM, but with a prompt and say, now, based on this evidence, can you answer my question? Has the company described supply chain spend? And if this LLM says yes, then I'm going to have an answer yes or no, and also very importantly, the reasoning of why the model reached the conclusion yes or no. And fundamentally, the most important thing is that this output will go to a human reviewer because we never argue that this should be a process of full automatization, but rather it should be a process where a human is in the loop to assess the results. If in case the modern BERT says I can't find any sentences, I don't have any evidence, or the model says I just don't know how to answer this question or there is an error, then I will our structure, our AIMS-QA framework is going to go to a second agent, a watchdog that is there when this first streamlined pipeline fails. And here, instead of going to our modern BERT, for extracting evidence. We are using a RAG pipeline that takes a document and based on the similarity of the words and other assessments on with the question that we're asking, supply chain spend, is going to extract a new evidence. The sentences that this model sentence BERT model thinks is irrelevant, and then gives this to the large language model with the same prompt, and then this will say yes, and this is or no, and this is my reasoning. And then the human reviewer will be able to make a decision based on the answers and the reasoning if they really believe that the company has met or not or responded sufficiently to answer that question and meet that criteria. So this is the framework that we've built and how we were able now not only to assess as we did before if for the mandatory criteria, but now to be able to take any of the questions that we have outlined in this project and in the mapping and then be able to have a structure that would allow us to assess. And we hope that this is something that will be deployed. So the way we have assessed the results of this method is that we have taken the 37 priority questions, and then we have run this pipeline across a couple of documents, and we had two domain experts to annotate those documents, and then we looked at the predictions of the models and the predictions of the annotators, and then we are able to compare. And we see that the models are performing very, very well. But we also observe that even the annotator, the expert one and expert two, they don't always agree on what if a sentence is or not correctly answered, because this is a very complex task, and those documents are written by very well-skilled lawyers and marketing people that tend to write those documents with a bit of ambiguity, and that's why this is such a hard and a natural language processing task, and that's why it's so important to have a human in the loop. But overall, we see a very great performance from both of our from our models, and we also observe that. And put this slide is just to show a different way the same results, looking at both of the experts and the way they have assessed, and we see that very simple criteria such as approval and signature, the models are really good at answering those questions. And similarly, even with structure operation, but when it comes down to measuring effectiveness, all the different descriptions of mitigation and remediation, but also consultation, which is a bit complex because it's not about consulting your own and control entities on anything, but it is about consulting them on the development of this statement. And even sometimes the company can describe that they have run consultation with their own and control entities on their modern slavery policy or on their ESG policy, but that's not what this question is about. That's not what this criteria is about. And that's why it is confusing sometimes even for experts to grasp, or let alone for the models. And I think that is illustrating, while it looks like it's a very easy task to just ask some questions on some documents. In fact, those documents are not random documents, they are complex legal documents, and they're written by humans who have put a lot of thought into how to be prescriptive enough to make sure that they look like they are they're responding to the requirements of the law, but they are not too providing too much information in case they could be at any point any confusion or court litigations or who knows. So this is a very important application of AI in the natural language processing, and a lot more work can be done. And here I would like to emphasize some of those challenges that we face beyond the language complexity. And some of them are still related to the AI. We are using here generative AI. As you saw in the second part of the analysis, we provide prompts to a generative model, and there is a lot of hallucination. We see many times that um, the model just comes up with reasonings that have really bad they cannot really justify why the answer is the way they said, and that they're making up facts that are not actually found within the statements. But also we say that many times while the prediction is correct, let's say yes, the answer is yes, the company has described this, the reasoning is completely hallucinated. So that's why it's so important to have that explainability method on top of the prediction of the classification, because we don't only care about the prediction, yes or no, but we also care about understanding as a human reviewer, as a domain expert, why the model predicted what it did. And that's one of the limitations that highlights that why this is so important. But also sometimes specific criteria have a lot of sentences that are relevant, and then when you take all of those sentences and 100 words around them as context, the evidence that is then provided to the model to assess based on the prompt could be very large. And we used to this framework Olama to be able to run our models, and it took us a few iterations of human error analysis, so error analysis by hand, to realize that we were getting these errors that we couldn't understand where they're coming from, and the model was behaving very strangely. And in fact, it was because there was this technical limitation that the Olama has a 2,000 words limit that was causing failure. So then luckily we were able to identify that, and then we changed the way we design the pipeline so that we don't run into this issue, and then the model doesn't have to attempt to please us by trying to answer our question, but actually not seeing any evidence and then hallucinating. So those are important technical aspects. But there were also limitations on the way we designed the questions. Many times when we had questions, has the company described X and Y, the model was generally becoming quite confused. But even in between us as domain experts, some of us were very strict in our annotations. They if it's an and, both of them needs to be met. If it's an or, then will be fine. And it was really important for us to reshape those questions. Then we also have ambiguous terms that are confusing sometimes, even or they're not fully agreed upon. Even among domain experts, let alone to an AI model. So living wage and minimum wage could be confusing. And then the other subtle distinctions between complex terms such as whistleblowing and how they differ between with a grievance mechanism, for instance. So those were important considerants, both limitations for the policy side, but also for the data side. Now, we believe that there is still a lot of potential for future works. We think that there is an opportunity to incorporate reinforcement learning, so incorporate the feedback loop. So when the human reviewers reviews the outputs, it can provide a feedback loop and improve the results. Enhanced reasoning, better prompting, for instance, can be a good method to do that. We need to work a lot more on question refinement, so to ensure that we control for limitations and we are as clear as possible, even for us humans to be able to agree on the answer and as well to guide the AI model to be as precise as possible. And also we don't have annotated data set a lot for all these different 211 questions. We have a large data set for the mandatory criteria, as I described, but those are at high level. So we need to build more annotated data set and maybe move back from time to time to fine-tuning models for very complex cases. And for that, we need clear documentation and guidelines and a lot of work to ensure that that data is really good. And then we need, again, when we create these guidelines, but also the questions to be able to be very careful with dealing with very complex legal terminology or domain terminology. And hopefully we will, in future works, this work can be scaled and can be kept sustainable. This framework, because it has all this context and because it still relies on large language model with prompts, it is still quite slow and it can run quite a lot of computation costs. And we know we don't want to be able to provide solutions that are expensive, not only for the user, but also for the planet. So this is a really important considerant to bring down the cost, but still be able to scale. This is our paper, AIMS QA, and we are very grateful again for your time, for listening to us. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I look forward to hearing from you. And please stay in touch. Thank you.